context about what we're going to be speaking about. And we're going to be speaking about essentially one thing. My argument is there is a limit to spirituality when it comes to developing ethical selves, if you like, and ethical leaders. There's also a deeper well of power that spirituality can offer us, which I don't think that we are tapping into enough. So limits and also potential for spirituality in developing ethical leaders, that's essentially the argument I'm going to be talking about. And I'm looking at this from a perspective of, I have been working with organisations on developing responsible leaders. And so some of this comes from my research and some of it comes from my own experience of looking at how we actually develop ethical leaders, and also actually by applying some of this work in my work with my students, undergraduate students, postgrad students, etc. So I don't intend this to be the truth by any stretch of imagination. It's something for provocation and discussion rather than, you know, the final word in anything, to be honest with you. Right, okay. So we're going to start with the Good Samaritan experiment. Could you put your hands up if you come across Darlene Batson's Good Samaritan experiment? One or two, okay. Great experiment, Darlene Batson, 1973, Princeton Seminary. They asked for some volunteers from the seminarians to participate in a psychological study. From these volunteers, they asked them to come to a big hall where everyone sort of did a test. And so therefore the volunteers believed that doing the test was part of the experiment. Now, it wasn't. What they were then asked to do is they were asked to go to the other side of the campus to go and give a talk on the Good Samaritan. So they were primed to think of the Good Samaritan. They went in different blocks, basically, and some of them were told that you are in a hurry, the audience is waiting, sorry, we've gone over time, you better get over there straight away. And it was quite a long way. The other half were told that you've got plenty of time, you've got half an hour to get over there, settle yourself in, think about what you're going to say, and off you go. Now, on their way to the hall, someone who was walking along the street collapsed with a fake heart attack or fake illness or whatever it was, and started groaning on the floor and clearly was in some distress. Now, I would hope that people studying for the priesthood in America would be highly ethical people. And so the question is, how many people actually stopped to help the person in distress? In the low hurry group, how many people stopped to help the person in distress? Any you know, starters for 10?
90%.
90, okay, got 90? Anybody else?
Lower.
Sorry, lower?
Lower.
Yeah? Okay, lower. You can't go wrong with that, can you? 60. 63%. Okay, so 63%, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. You know, why wasn't it 90? Yeah, interesting. In the high hurry group, how many people stopped to help the person in distress?
63%.
No, indeed. They didn't. Any ideas? It was 10%. 10%, okay. Now, there are lots of different ways of interpreting this study, but clearly one of them is that context matters. And context matters not simply for you and me and the ordinary man in the street, but context matters for people who are highly trained in developing their spirituality and in developing their ethical senses, as it were, their ethical capabilities. And as I said, in 10% of the cases there, 10% of those people stopped to help that man in distress. So what's going on here? Oh, there we go. 10%, and there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through a model I use for responsible leadership. Responsible leadership is broader than ethical leadership, but I think you can't separate them out, particularly in the context within which we're living today. So here's the model. I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail. In the middle here, we have what we would call ethical leadership, character and integrity. You can't actually be a responsible leader unless you have a deep sense of ethics and ethical maturity. But for responsible leadership, we need to be connected with the world in terms of the problems around sustainability of our planet. We need to be connected with the world in terms of social justice, particularly if we're in business. Well, obviously all of us do, but business is a particularly powerful player in that space. We need to be connected to the world in terms of power and governance, and who controls our institutions and organisations and whether we're holding them to account. We need to be connected to the world in terms of encouraging individual and societal flourishing and well-being. And if we're not connected to the world in that space, then really what's the point of being an ethical leader in some respects? I'm sorry, but that's my view. And then if that's the knowledge area, the action area in red is we need to clarify our purpose. You know, what are we doing here on this planet? Where are we going? What's my purpose for being? We need to actually engage with a topic that is very, very rarely discussed, but I think is absolutely crucial to everything we'll be talking about today, which is power. We need to give power away if we're in senior positions, encourage and empower people. We need to take it if we're not, and sometimes we're in both, of course. And then we need to lead change. So ethical leaders looks at this notion of character integrity, but it's just one element in my view of what we are about in this room, to be honest with you. So this is what I've been looking at, is responsible leadership development. How do we develop responsible leaders, which includes, obviously, clearly character and ethics. And one of the most important mechanisms for developing responsible leadership is the idea of service learning agreements, which some of you may have heard of and some of you may not have heard of. But this is the predominant mechanism at the moment used by many organisations in their responsible leadership programmes. So what this involves is taking leaders in business out of their environment and they go on a project. The project can take a month, it can take 3 months, it can sometimes take even longer than that. And they are partnered with an organisation, it may be in their own home country or it may be abroad somewhere, where they have to actually bring their skills and talents to that particular project in partnership with the NGO that they might be working with to address a community problem in some way. It could be around education, it could be working with prostitution, it could be working with addiction, it could be working with prisoners. You know, it could be anything to do with the problems of the society in which they're allocated. So they go out and they spend some time out there, and it's not them coming to fix. That's really, really, really important. It's not them coming to fix. They partner with probably an NGO, and then they actually form a mutually mentoring relationship with the NGO. And, you know, I've spoken to people who've been on these things. Some of the people have actually come up through the school system, the university system, into PwC. This is the place, the organisation I worked with originally, and they have never been outside of that tram line. So they've sort of gone to university and then up to PwC, and they're basically talking to the top 1%. So this can be a profoundly transformational experience when you're suddenly working with, as I said, prisoners or prisoners' families, the homeless. They've never encountered this before. And again, some people go abroad and to work with in developing countries as well. Now, these can be, as I said, profoundly transformational experiences for people. But what we found is that there's a problem. There's a being-doing gap. So here we have 4 domains in which that transformational learning can actually manifest itself. So you can imagine someone who's profoundly moved by their experience, who suddenly realise, you know, how lucky they are. They've got a deep well of gratitude, of guilt and shame as well, it must be said, and they want to give back. All of a sudden they have this great urge inside them to give back. And they know they can because they're very, very talented, skilled people who've got lots and lots of resources. And what we found is that here, for example, outside the organisation, in the level of being, many of them do change profoundly. So particularly in areas like work-life balance, being in the moment, being grateful for their own life and everything they've got around them, we see profound transformations here. We also see profound transformations, if you like, outside the firm and in the doing arena. So many of them go into their communities and they may volunteer, they may stay in touch with the NGO they were working with, they may continue to be a trustee on that board, and they find a newfound sort of dedication, if you like, to working in the community. And this is not all people by any stretch, but you know, that's just in general. You know, inside the firm, at the being level, again, we do see an ability to transfer their learning. So with their teams, they actually are much more compassionate, they're much more present for their teams, they change their management and their leadership styles to be more human-centred and less task-centred. That's quite easy to do. But what we found is actually many of them find they cannot transfer their learning any further outside their immediate team. So they try to talk to their peers and colleagues, not interested. Try to talk to their bosses, not interested. Simply, and the firm or the organisation continues along its tram lines, and is unimpacted by the fact that these people have gone through these experiences. So we're getting responsible leaders, but actually they're not making any impact on the firm, and so then we often get a sense of alienation. And many people, have that sense of alienation. You're one person in the home, and then when you come into the organisation, you go along the tramlines, and you're another person in the organisation. So even though this is predominantly the most powerful learning experience for developing ethical leaders and responsible leaders that is currently being discussed and explored, it doesn't work. It doesn't make responsible or ethical organisations. Here's some statistics. So Plessmark and Spa did an extensive study looking at this knowing-doing gap. 40% of participants had no changes in behavioural skill, even in general leadership development. Okay? And only 35% experienced a desire to pay back, having gone through this experience. So even though you might be very, very moved by it, you don't have necessarily a desire to sort of give up everything and leave your job, or even give up any period, any sort of element of your resources or time whatsoever. Yorio and Ye looked at service learning amongst university students, which promoted changes in social attitudes, service learning amongst university students promoted changes in social attitudes which did not translate into behavioural changes in civic responsibility. So again, we're getting these changes in attitudes, changes in understanding of the world, levels of gratitude for what I have, but it's still not translating into, in that case, civic responsibility, or in the other case, changes in the organisational climate. So again, we need to ask what is happening here. Now, this is a totally non-scientific test which I often use for my students. I ask them, let's imagine you have this wonderful, perfectly ethical person, does everything that you would expect an ethical leader to do, is compassionate to his employees or her employees, is fair, is just, is kind, all of the wonderful things, is very moral and has a core set of values which they actually model. That's, let's say, number 10. Down here, we have the other end of the scale. We have the psychopath, or the narcissist, a person who basically does anything to pursue their own interests and doesn't care about anything else but themselves. And I asked the students to line up where they would put themselves. Okay. Luckily, no one normally puts themselves down here, but they might put themselves here. Okay. And no one calls themselves a saint, actually, but some of them do put themselves up here. But clearly the vast majority put themselves in this 68% bit here. Okay? And the interesting thing, there is a tendency to have a divide. Can you guess what types of people would be more on this side? The men. Who said so?
The men.
You're right, it's the gender. The women put themselves more on the ethical side, and all clustered down here are mostly the men. It's astonishing. I do it time and time. Non-scientific and completely. Okay? Completely non-scientific, but interesting nevertheless. So what I'm trying to say here is, this type of gathering is rather unique. We're all passionate about values. You could even say that we might fall into the principled part of this normal distribution curve, or possibly going towards what I call the practical. I'll follow my values as long as it doesn't get too much in my way. I don't know how many of us drove here up with a car that spewed out. I did. Did I take part in the ride? No, I didn't. So I do know that my values are a little bit compromised. So maybe we might put ourselves sort of there-ish. But there's a whole bunch of people actually down this end of the scale, and I know that people will accuse me of being what they call essentialist, i.e. maybe people aren't down there, maybe it's just reflecting their context and what they've learned and their experience, but I'm not going to go into that argument now. Let's just imagine that there are people, and we've all met them, guys, in our organisations who are not here. They're down there, and we've all met them, and we can probably list them, yeah? And so when we start talking about the role of spirituality in terms of developing ethical leaders, we're sort of talking about trying to skew this distribution curve. We're trying to talk about getting these people much more over here. And that is a very, very, very difficult task. We've already seen that actually, whilst you might be able to do it on an individual level, and maybe people might go and volunteer and be a trustee of a charity, when it comes to a communal or collective level, people are much more influenced by context. Much more influenced by what goes on in their organisations, how they're rewarded, how they're promoted. And so they become they develop their personal spirituality maybe outside. When they go into the organisation, they're much more influenced by the context. And that's just human, okay? So when we're looking at developing ethical leaders, essentially there's loads and loads and loads and loads of stuff on the power of context. And for those of you who are interested, I would recommend you visit the Ethics Unwrapped at the University of Texas, that have loads and loads and loads and loads of videos telling students and telling everyone why you are not ethical. We know Milgram. Everyone knows Milgram? You know, the electric shock tests. You know, we will obey authority. If someone tells us to kill somebody, although we don't realise we're killing them, we will press that button and administer an electric shock, which would have killed someone had it been true. We know that, and they've repeated that experiment in recent times as well. The Zimbardo experiments. Some people know about the Zimbardo's prison experiments, where they divide students here. You're the prisoners. You're prison guards. They behave like prison guards. They behave like prisoners. These become sort of psychopathic. Jane Elliott's blue eyes, brown eyes experiments. Basically, Jane Elliott was a teacher in America at the time of the 60s, when there were a lot of racial problems, still are of course, and divides her class into blue eyes and brown eyes. And then basically, that's it, fine. I'm aware of it. And basically what she says is, blue-eyed people, you're superior, brown-eyed people, you're inferior. Suddenly all of the friendship groups completely dissolve, all the blue eyes congregate together, brown eyes congregate together, and the blue eyes bully the brown eyes. And the brown eyes actually seriously think they're inferior. So we know that actually our behaviour is a function of context. And, experience, well, it's basically a function of context. And we can manipulate that behaviour if we manipulate the context. The evidence now is absolutely uncontrovertible. So again, psychological effects on ethical behaviour. I don't know if any of you have been reading Jonathan Haidt recently. He's a fascinating moral psychologist. And he basically says a lot of our ethical behaviours are instinctive. So he says, he gives an experiment to his students. He asks them, there's a girl and a boy, both sort of over age, Okay. Right. And basically he says to the class, okay, these people, they want to basically have sex, all right? They don't want to have a child, so they use protection. Is that okay? Okay? And so everyone says, yeah, that's okay. If they want to have sex, they can have sex, basically. And then he says, if I told you an additional fact, how would you respond? And then the students say, okay, so he tells me an additional fact. The additional fact is that they're brother and sister. Okay? Everyone goes, ugh, ugh, disgusting, yeah? Now, the thing is, they can't justify that moral impulse because they're not going to have children. The only rational reason for them not to have sex, therefore, is because they would generate a child that might have sort of problems, yeah? But he goes around and he asks those students, why is it wrong, why is it wrong, why is it wrong? And they can't explain it. The instinct comes before the brain, basically, and he has lots of similar experiments and he writes about this whole notion of instincts and the role of instincts in moral and ethical behaviour. I won't go through all of these, but maybe you might have seen Margaret Haffernan or willful blindness. Bristol Royal Infirmary case is a classic case of that. In all of these cases of scandals, most of the time, HBOS is another one, BP is another one, you look at them, they know the information is in the organisation that will indicate that there is a problem. It is widely known in the organisation, but people don't speak up. Margaret Haffernan calls it willful blindness, and that actually, I'm sure that comes from Bristol Royal Infirmary and that notion of willful blindness. We also know about social dominance orientation. Social dominance orientation, big topic, but essentially, some people have, it's a bit of an alpha male syndrome, basically. So some people are more, possess more social dominance orientation. They see the world in terms of a Darwinistic survival of the fittest. They see themselves as superior. They see themselves as actually, those people who get to the tops of organisations are superior to the people below them. It's a competition for resources. If I've got to the top, then I deserve more resources because I'm a superior human being. And so therefore you're getting narcissism, you're getting elements of psychopathy, bullying. Think Donald Trump, basically. And what we do know about social dominance orientation, which is quite scary, is that they're attracted to hierarchical, powerful organisations, and when they get to those organisations promote them over and above the people who are competent. That is really important. And that's supported by McClelland, who basically found in the 60s and 70s that many people were motivated by achievement, power, or relationships, basically. And those who are motivated by power, they're either motivated by power to do good or power for their own egos. And again, it's the people who are motivated by power who get to the tops of these large hierarchical and powerful organisations over and above any other motivational mix. So when we look at leaders, often these people are orientated towards that left-hand side. They are more psychopathic. They have got social dominance orientation. And then, of course, when they get into power, you probably are familiar with the Daedalus Institute and all the work being done on the effects of power on the brain. They get into power, testosterone starts to rise, causing the actual psychopathic behaviours and narcissistic behaviours we're familiar with. And oxytocin actually goes down, which is the bonding chemical. So oxytocin is a hormone that mothers have when they have their baby to connect them. And levels of oxytocin goes down for those people who actually possess positions of power. So we're fighting against quite a lot when we're expecting spirituality to develop ethical leaders. You know, a heck of a lot. It's the wrong people that get into positions of power. They sort of strongly influence the context, and we will tend to go along with our environments because we're human beings and we need to connect. We have strong desires for liking and for connection and for relationships and for compliance and security and all those things. So, how can spirituality counter, if you like, that? And that's what my question is, really. And that's something I've been thinking about. So, tempered radicals is a notion that Deborah Meyerson has, of people who are, they have countercultural values. How do you pursue a life in an organisation with countercultural values? Her book is very interesting. She follows about 6 people in their organisations who are trying to pursue an authentic life, despite the fact that the organisation around them isn't particularly conducive to their values. So you could do that. It's quite an isolating type of strategy to do. We've got pressure groups and social movements, and I'm going to be talking about that later. But you know, you can bond together in groups of people who are like-minded and start to form groups. And that's where I think spirituality has got something to offer us, actually. We'll explore that in a second. Now, when I talk about spirituality to students or to people who are working in organisations, most people think of mindfulness. Yeah, and I'm sure you will be aware of that. So mindfulness is on the agenda everywhere. All the organisations are using it pretty much for what you were saying earlier on, Andy, because it promotes happy staff who are much more productive. Is that what spirituality like? Sometimes I talk to people, I just come back from a conference in Ireland on global responsible leadership. There's a lot of people there who talk about higher consciousness. And they say, I'm not Christian. Oh my God, I'm not Christian. Oh God, no. We had a little exercise where we all get around the room, we all had to find people who like the same music as us. Okay, and I'm a bit strange, I like Christian rock music. So everyone else was going around saying, you know, singer-songwriter, you know, baroque or reggae or whatever, and I was going around, Christian rock music? No one in the room. And I started, you know, if I start to talk about, I just had some long conversations with people about my own spirituality, my own faith, I could see how people got very, very tense when I started talking about Christianity. And quite true, you know, there's a lady from South Africa, and she said, well, I just associate that with colonialism and oppression. So again, we have got a problem, guys. And what I think there is that, and what I'm learning to do, is actually to translate my Christian faith into a language that those who are interested in spirituality actually appreciate, so we connect. So I talk about God as higher consciousness, the kingdom of heaven as higher consciousness. And sometimes I have to be careful who I'm speaking to, because if I speak about that language to people in the church, they sometimes think I'm really wacky. But when I talk about Christian and God and He and my relationship with God and all this type of thing to some people who are coming from that level, then they think I'm just a bit of a loser, really, to be honest with you. Is it about religion? I don't know. I think I've got some views about religion. As I say, people have got quite strong views about Christianity and its role in this space, which we have to acknowledge. Is it about tuning into values? A lot of stuff now is all about giving voice to values. If you come across Mary Gentile's stuff, she's got a whole curriculum on giving voice to values, finding out who you are, finding your authentic self, tuning into your values, living them out. But again, they're not really addressing some of the issues that I have been talking about here. And you know, there's a lot of people as well in this area. As I said, I've just come back from the Global Responsible Leadership Conference here. They'll talk about this, and they'll know that spirituality is actually central to the argument. And I'm going to give you a quick example in a second. So everyone's talking about spirituality, but it's interesting that most of the time they're talking about spirituality on an individual level. And that, I think, is where the problem lies. We can't just go back into our homes, into our communities, and just be spiritual people and then expect to be able to live out our spiritual values in a context which is far too strong for us to fight, far too strong as individuals. But we can actually, I think, learn to live out our values in community in the organisations within which we work. But I don't see that necessarily happening a lot. I have seen it happening a couple of times. So, so some of the work that's being done at the moment in terms of this individual level spirituality, you will recognise here some of the spiritual disciplines. This is work from Mary Crossan, basically, and her colleagues. And she's just come out with a book called Developing Leadership Character, and it's based on research, but you will recognise integrity, courage, accountability, collaboration, humility, justice, temperance. Transcendence comes out a lot in these types of models. Judgment, humanity. So these are, if you like, are many of the virtues that would come from what Peterson and Seligman say would come from the world's wisdom traditions, which are generic across all the world's religions and wisdom traditions. And that's now being very, very strongly brought into leadership development. Very, very strongly brought into leadership development. Look, but this is interesting. A Blueprint for Better Business here is a Catholic-led initiative. Very, very influential in terms of the discussions around the role of business in society, and it's a collective venture. And that's where I think we can start to make a difference in society about developing ethical leaders. Not simply about developing individual ethical leaders, but actually as a group of us here, we can actually start to make our voices heard if we come together as a collective. And I think Blueprint for Better Business is a good example of that. I'm going to leave you with something which I found very inspiring, as I said, from this Global Responsible Leadership Conference I just come back from. I don't know if anyone knows the Powell Memorandum. Has anyone heard of Powell or Mont Pelerin at all? This was in the 70s. The Chicago School of Economists, Hayek and Milton Friedman, and all those, the right-wing economists, decided they were going to change the paradigm. Essentially, they were going to change the paradigm from a sort of social democratic collectivist paradigm to a neoliberal, essentially Thatcherite paradigm. They said they wouldn't get us because we were too old, we'd passed by, but they were going to get our children, okay? And they have. They were very, very successful. They had a strategy as to how they were going to do that, and there's lots and lots of information I can give to you if you're interested in finding out how they did it, but they basically targeted the schools, businesses, media, arts, every single element of society they targeted, and they basically had a strategy to make sure, but we all believed that the purpose of business is what? To make a profit, to actually maximise shareholder value. It's a myth, okay? It's a neoliberal paradigm. And what I came back to this conference, and there's now a response to that, which has just been put together, just recently, in the last couple of months. They called it the Meadows Memorandum, after John Taylor Meadows, who's a systems theorist. And they have come up, right, we are going to change the paradigm. Okay? We're going to change the paradigm, and it's rooted in spirituality. It's got spirituality going right the way through it. It's an amazingly inspiring document. And again, these people have got together, they've got a strategy, they're going to change society. But not just by focusing on individual spirituality, collectively. And that's, I think, how we can develop